If we were a free people, how would we pay for the public works crew to fill the pothole? If we were a free people, who would pay for the fusion center a block from the county courthouse, where there's a staff of 4 combining data and making the pre-crime scenario in a science fiction movie more and more of a possibility? That movie is Minority Report, already 10 years old. If we were a free people, who would pay for human services? I put quotes around human services because by that, we refer to that great system, that great silent machinery, which includes Medicare and Medicaid and the welfare system, the federal medical system, according to a doctor writing in the Wall Street Journal, consuming 40% of the funds that come from taxation and borrowing in Medicare. 40%. If we were a free people, who would pay for traffic lights? How on earth would traffic lights exist? If we were a free people, there would be no way of organizing among private parties or among towns the operation of signals and also pedestrian signals. Who would pay for pedestrian walks if we were a free people? If we were a free people, there would be no signals that say green walk and red stop or yellow caution. There would be no signal, and old ladies and children and mothers with strollers would dare to venture into the intersection and face the peril of death if they crossed the intersection. If we were a free people, because if we were a free people, how would we pay for that device, that hugely overpriced device sold to government corporations by industry with a markup of 4,000 or 5,000%, no doubt, above the actual cost of the technology and the labor to build that crossing walk indicator? If we were a free people, how would we pay for child protective services, which seizes children from doctors' offices, whose front desks make that call out of anybody's notice about a suspicious health condition of a child, or a bruise on a child's arm that seems suspicious and is not immediately explained by the mother to the doctor. The mother who refused to answer a question about whether there are firearms in the house, and who, it seemed to the doctor's nursing assistant, was a little unhappy about answering questions beyond the scope of the immediate call of that child's condition in that office. And that mother may be abusing her children. And so a call has to be made to the CPS, the Child Protective Services, and a team arriving with a police officer standing with his thumbs in his buckle behind the social worker, demanding entry into that house, demanding to see that child, demanding to make an inspection without a warrant. The mother, of course, not knowing that such cannot be done without a warrant. Who is going to pay for that officer's buckle and his webbing belt with its gun, its baton, its club, its flashlight, its taser, and his spare magazines? Who is going to pay for that if we are a free people? Who's going to pay for the human dog kennels called nursing homes if we are a free people? How is that going to be paid for? Where will old people go if we're a free people and somehow there's no state upon which to rely, and that old soul has to be cared for by her son or her daughter? If we're a free people, where do nursing homes go? Who pays for them if we are a free people? If we are a free people, if we live under constitutional liberty, who is going to pay for the cartel of public schools in Hamilton County, which has inmate 44,000 students at a minimal cost of $44 million that's paid for by you, my listener? Assuming each child costs the state $10,000 a year to keep in the factory system, with its classes, its ringing bells, its teachers who instruct about liberty and the Constitution and the marketplace, and its programs which esteem God the Creator and put man in his place. Who is going to pay for that system if we are a free people? If we're a free people, who's going to pay for the state trooper and the equipment in this car? Who's going to pay? Who's going to pay for the county courthouse with its tower above it and a kind of streak-stained side walls and outer exterior? And on the top of that tower is a clock that's dripping with stain from bad weather, a clock that doesn't work. If we're free people, who's going to pay for that? Who's going to pay for the police cruiser parked outside the court, where inside an innocent man is charged and his life wrecked by a state prosecutor who says that he cannot possibly exercise his constitutional rights? There are no constitutional rights to mobility. There is no property right that inheres in the movement of yourself from one place to another. Who is going to pay for that trooper who is the witness in a case that says that you can have a gun, but it cannot have a bullet in it because that is carrying a weapon with the intent to go armed? Who's going to pay for that trooper's overtime? Who's going to pay for that trooper's pension if we are free people? Who's going to pay for the surveillance in that courtroom, that machine that searches your briefcase and makes note that you have 3 extra batteries for your phone, an extra battery for your tape recorder, some cable for the charger, and a notebook, and some other miscellaneous things from your office, and make sure that your belt buckle is not an armor-piercing round, and that somehow your belt itself does not contain explosive material, because you are going in to buy a car tag, and we need to make sure that your equipment, your person, is not a threat to public safety and not a threat to the officer. Who's going to pay for that system if we're free people? If we're free people and we don't have the state, who's going to pay for the rows of computers in the trustee's office where property taxes are collected, because no one in the county, no one in the city owns title to land, and that the land that they have their houses on and the houses themselves are in hock in Chattanooga to nearly $1 billion nearly of debt for services, of debt for corporate municipality consumption for services to the public. Who's going to pay for those services to the public? And who's going to pay that debt? And who's going to pay the computers, the rows of computers there behind the awnings? Computers, of course, decorated with family photos of the clerks and their memorabilia, their little knickknacks, their Christmas ornaments, their Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeers with a little blinking light. Who's going to pay for that computer that stands next to that Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer with the blinking light and the jovial Santa looking up at the member of the public who's sitting there waiting to be served? Who is going to pay for all that if we are free people? Who's going to pay for all those services in that building and the federal building? Who's going to pay for the new federal court that's planned eventually downtown in Chattanooga as the federal government finds more money in its budget? Who's going to pay for the pink water picture at that county courthouse that would go on the second table? There are 3 pictures, but one, the clerk says, keeps disappearing. And so there's a water pitcher with ice in it behind the judge's bench. There's a pink water pitcher with ice water inside and a white top on the table of the prosecutor, where the prosecutor, a lady, sits there with a state trooper who states evidence and has a water jug. But who's going to pay for the water pitcher on the table of the defendant? There is no water pitcher there. There are just about 6 plastic cups turned on their head in the middle of the table. And there's a folder there from the clerk who has to give something to a lawyer who's expected to defend a poor innocent man a little bit later in the morning, starting at about 9 o'clock. Who's going to pay for that water pitcher if we are a free people? If we're a free people, how are we going to pay for all these things that are thought to be the benefits of having government? As Oliver Wendell Holmes said, if you have government, you have to pay for it, and taxes are the means by which we pay for civilization. If we're going to have civilization of this kind, with its national government, with its international projection of power from AFRICOM, CENTCOM, AMERICOM, and all the coms, the PACIFICOM, who is going to pay for it if we are a free people? If we're a free people, how can we pay for all these things? How can we pay for the system which registers cars? How do we pay for a driver license system which registers driver's licenses and puts their movements under the authority and control of the Uniform Administrative Procedures Act, which is the act that controls regulatory agencies. If we're a free people, how can we pay for this giant regime with its thousands of moving parts, some of them moving without friction, but others moving with great expense, great complication, great exaggeration of complexity, increasing complexity, increasing bewilderment? Who is going to pay for all those systems if we are a free people? And we're not a free people, and we don't deserve to be a free people. And here's why. Here's why we don't deserve it. Because somehow you think, my listener, that if we were free, there would simply be chaos. If there were people such as Alfred J. Hirsch in Lawrenceburg, Tennessee, who pretends with presumption that he can be free, if he's right, if Arthur J. Hirsch is right, then we have only chaos. There is only disorganization. Of course, every user of the road has to be an operator of a motor vehicle and has to be driving. These are terms of words in commerce. These are words that describe commercial operations. And of course, you, my listener, think maybe that you're just having a driver's license as a private user. Well, private users are private users. And if I read the statute right, don't have to have driver's licenses. But that's not the story that we're being told by the state, which prosecutes people who claim to be operating privately using the public road, the roads owned by the people with the state as steward and trustee. Those people, they are prosecuted because they cannot be heard. They cannot be allowed to move about freely. There is no right in movement. There is no right in having a weapon with bullets in it. Yes, you may have a weapon. You may keep your weapon at your house, but you cannot move it without facing the charge, an abstract and vague charge, unconstitutional since the 1840s. It has not been overturned. The charge called carrying a weapon with the intent to go armed. How is it that people can be charged with that? Do you know that that law was written against blacks? It was written after the Nat Turner Rebellion in the 1830s or 40s. And it has always allowed for the arbitrary and capricious claiming of the white establishment against the black man. These laws are still on the books, though blacks are free. They've been free for well over 100 years. And yet the law that suppresses the black free man, the black man who's free but can't be considered honorable and must be viewed constantly with suspicion, those laws, the law that does not let you carry a bullet in your gun, is against the black man. It has always been against the slave and the freed slave. And that was part of our racist past that David Cook mentions in his column yesterday. How can we be free if we want these benefits, the benefits of having licensed drivers, the benefits of having cars registered by the state? The cars registered by the state through their VIN become articles in commerce and are not allowed to be private property. A car registered with the state, one admits, is not private property. It is a kind of property held loosely by you as a nominal owner, but which the real ownership belongs to the state. And we know that it belongs to the state because you cannot get a title of it. The title to the car is held presumptively by the state. You get only a certificate of title. You don't hold that title. No, the state of Tennessee holds that title. How can we pay for that whole system through the Department of Safety and Homeland Security if we own our cars? How can that possibly work if we own our cars? There's no surveillance. There's no fee to be paid. There's no record keeping. There's no threat that the state can hold through the licensing system against careless drivers who have accidents. How can we have public safety, which is the nominal charge to that department? How can we have public safety if we have people who are not part of it, who are not part of the administrative regime through the licensing, insurance requirements, and the other rules that effectively prohibit and ban movement at liberty and at will? We are unwilling to be free, and we know that's true. I know that's true as a matter of fact because yesterday there was a trial held in Lawrence County, and a man named Arthur J. Hirsch, whom I mentioned a moment ago, was convicted on 4 counts of one, a gun charge, and the other 3 operating a motor vehicle without a license charges, and failure to produce registration charges, the last one being insurance. And all of which, as he argued, apply to those in commerce and do not apply to someone operating under the Constitution, claiming the benefits and protections of the Constitution. That cannot be had. If that is allowed, how can we pay for all the things that are part of civilization? As Justice Holmes said, how can this man operate freely while you, my listener, you, the juror, you have to pay these things. You know that you have to have a driver's license to drive a car. You know that it has to be registered with the state and effectively belong to the state. You know that, and you accept that. How can it be that anyone would think that he can be apart from that? That is the argument that Tammy Rettig, the state's attorney, yesterday in Lawrence County, made to the jury of 12, including 2 men who were in the trucking business, 6 men and 6 women. And so they did what was reasonable. They did what was free and true and good. They found this man who was willing to be free and willing to defend his freedom in court. They found him guilty. And by noon today, he has to come up with $10,000 bond. A poor laborer, a very, very intelligent Christian man known in that town as the Fiddle Man, who has a Christian ministry to hundreds of people in those human dog kennels called nursing homes. 3 nursing homes and a hospital in that Middle Tennessee town, enjoying his music, enjoying his uplifting conversation, and his honor and his dignity. And he, now a poor man, wrecked in his business, wrecked in his personal affairs by criminal accusations, that he cannot possibly be a free person. Because if everybody were like him, we would have chaos. That is the argument that's made by the state. And that is the argument that's a default argument that exists between the heads of most people today, maybe even in your head. I sure hope not. My name is David Tulis, and I hope that you don't think like that. I hope you are willing to believe that people are generally good. Now, as a Christian, I would say that man is depraved from the beginning. He has completely fallen in sin through Adam. And yet what's remarkable about the Christian analysis is that it puts a man down as far as he can possibly go. He is completely sinful before God. He's a sinner. He is wretched. He deserves death and damnation in this life and in the next. That's the Christian description of the fall. But Christianity does something much more. It saves man. What has happened in our country is that people such as those jurors who typify the American man, those people believe that human society, human organization, human culture is distinctively bad and evil and suspicious. They view the free, independent man who's a little different, a little quirky, with suspicion and nervousness. They believe that there has to be a state to constantly monitor, to constantly keep track of, say, people and their driving histories. And that if we didn't have that, we don't have courts to ensure that torts and wrongs are righted, that courts really don't matter. And so in the jury yesterday in Lawrence County, like juries here in Tennessee and Chattanooga and Hamilton County, they believe in the fall. They believe in the fall. And so they believe in the welfare and surveillance and nanny state. And they do not believe in God. They do not believe in God, because if they did, they would see the second half of the story. And that is that there is redemption, that with Christ coming, with salvation generalized now through history in an exceeding way since the resurrection, men are generally becoming better. Salvation is coming into the nations, and that is the idea of grace, the idea of the marketplace, which is our theory. My theory here at AM 1240 Hot News Talk Radio is that capitalism and the free market are based on the template of the scriptures, and that's because Christ died for his enemies. He died for strangers, looked out for them. He lived, as it were, imaginatively, bringing them a benefit that they did not deserve and do not deserve. That's the marketplace where the entrepreneur serves the customer. He's looking out for the customer day and night, thinking about how that customer's life can be improved, how his expenses can be cut, how his operations can be made smoother, and how his software can not crash on him. That's what the entrepreneur does. He's thinking as Christ thinks about the church. And yet we don't deserve a marketplace. We don't deserve it. We do not deserve constitutional liberty, because somehow we fear that free people exercising freely in constitutional government that this is a system ripe for disaster, that somehow, if we are a free people with free government, that there will be simply chaos, mayhem, and anarchy. And that's what the jury believes. That's what the jury believes. And how can a free man defend his freedom if the generalized American thinks like that? Just think about it.
You give us 12 minutes and 40 seconds, we'll give you Chattanooga and the world.